At my son's first birthday lunch, my mother-in-law looked at him across the table and said, "I don't see any of our family in that child." 12 adults went silent. My husband's fork stopped midair. I was holding our baby, his little fingers wrapped around my thumb, while the woman who lived rent-free in an apartment my husband paid for decided to announce, in front of everyone, that our son did not belong. That moment didn't come from nowhere. My name is Alina, and for 3 years I had watched my mother-in-law treat me like a temporary inconvenience in her son's life, someone who could be tolerated as long as I didn't produce permanent evidence of my existence. Our son was that evidence, and when she rejected him publicly, she handed my husband a mirror he could no longer look away from. He saw a mother who had been living comfortably in an apartment he paid for while denying his child a place in the family. What followed was not just a fight. It was the complete dismantling of a financial and emotional arrangement she had assumed would last forever. And it began with a question neither of us had ever dared ask out loud. How far would she go to preserve her power, and what would happen when that power was cut off at the source? To understand how we got there, you have to go back 3 years, to the night I first met Daniel Harper. It was a Thursday in late October, the kind of mild autumn evening that makes people linger outside restaurants a little longer than they planned. I was at a coworker's birthday gathering at a bar downtown, half listening to someone tell a story about a lost luggage claim, when a man at the edge of the group caught something I said about the city's old industrial architecture and asked a follow-up question that actually made sense. That was Daniel. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but he was the only one who seemed more interested in the answer than in his own next sentence. He talked for 2 hours that night. He told me he ran a commercial contracting firm that he had started from practically nothing after his father passed, a business that now employed 42 people and handled projects across 3 states. He didn't say it to impress me. He said it like it was a weight he carried, something he was proud of but also exhausted by. I told him I worked as a campaign strategist for a nonprofit, which sounded fancier than it was, but he didn't let me downplay it. He asked what winning looked like for me, a question so few people had ever posed that I almost didn't recognize it. Within 6 months, we were building something real. Daniel was steady in a way that made me feel like I could exhale after years of holding my breath through relationships that demanded constant performance. He showed up early to things, remembered the name of my first boss, asked about my mother's surgery, even when his own week had been brutal. The only thing that puzzled me was how often his phone lit up with the same caller ID and how his shoulders tightened before he answered. I met Marguerite Harper on a Sunday afternoon in April, at a restaurant she had chosen because it had the kind of valet parking that makes you feel underdressed just walking past. She was 67 then, a woman whose posture communicated exactly where she believed she stood in the hierarchy of any room she entered. She wore a cream silk blouse and a single string of pearls that caught the light every time she turned her head, which was often, because she kept scanning the restaurant as if someone more important might walk in at any moment. When she shook my hand, her grip was brief and dry, and her eyes moved from my face to my shoes and back up with the efficiency of someone cataloging a minor acquisition. "So you're the one who's been keeping my son busy," she said, and smiled in a way that didn't reach the lower half of her face. It wasn't a question. I told her it was lovely to meet her. She turned to Daniel before I'd finished the sentence and asked if he'd remembered to call the accountant about her property tax statement. And there it was, the shape of things to come, delivered in a single conversational pivot. Over the months that followed, I began to map the invisible architecture of their relationship. Daniel's father had died of a heart attack 11 years earlier, leaving behind a modest estate and a widow who had never held a job outside the home. Daniel, the only child, had stepped in before the funeral flowers wilted. He took over his father's small renovation crew and grew it into Harper Commercial Contracting, a company that now handled 6-figure municipal contracts. And from the very first profitable quarter, he had done what he believed a good son does. He covered his mother's rent, her utilities, her car payments, her annual vacation to a timeshare in Naples. The apartment she lived in was a 2-bedroom in a building with a doorman, in a neighborhood where 1-bedrooms started at $2,800 a month. She had not contributed $1 toward it in a decade. I asked Daniel once, gently, whether she needed that much space for one person. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "It's what she's used to. My dad wanted her taken care of." He said it like a contract he'd signed without reading the fine print. Marguerite, meanwhile, treated me like a problem that might eventually resolve itself if she simply waited long enough. At family dinners, she would ask about my career with a faint air of surprise that I had one. "Still at that little nonprofit," she said once, passing a bread basket without looking at me. "It must be nice to have work that's more of a hobby." When I mentioned that our team had just secured a $2 million grant, she blinked and changed the subject to Daniel's latest project, which she described in detail, though she'd clearly misunderstood the scope entirely. But here is the thing I didn't understand until much later. Her real power didn't come from open insults. It came from the fact that Daniel had been trained, across 34 years of small moments, to translate her displeasure into his own guilt. When she sighed, he adjusted. When she hinted that she felt abandoned, he showed up. She had built a system where her comfort was tied directly to his sense of duty, and that system ran on a currency he didn't even realize he was spending: his own life. The engagement brought everything closer to the surface. He proposed on a Saturday in June, on the rooftop of the building where his first office had been, with a ring that he had clearly spent too long choosing. I said yes before he finished the question. When we told his mother the next day, she set down her fork and said, "Well, I suppose that was inevitable." Then she asked if we'd considered a prenuptial agreement that would protect the business he'd built from his father's foundation. I want to pause here and tell you that I was not naive. I understood that mothers can struggle to let go of sons. I expected some friction. What I didn't expect was the way she would weaponize every milestone, every celebration, every moment that should have been ours, and make it about her perceived loss of standing. The wedding was a small ceremony in a garden venue 40 miles outside the city. Marguerite wore a pale champagne gown that a few guests noted looked very close to ivory. During her toast, she spoke for 7 minutes about Daniel's childhood, his achievements, his loyalty to family, and mentioned me exactly once, in the final line, as the woman who gets to share his future. I smiled through it because that's what brides are supposed to do. But my mother, sitting at a corner table, later told me she'd never seen someone give a toast that sounded so much like a warning. After the wedding, Marguerite began to press harder. She called Daniel at odd hours with emergencies that weren't: a flickering light in the hallway, a strange noise from the refrigerator, a concern about the building's maintenance staff that turned out to be a neighbor's visiting grandson. Each call was a test, designed to confirm that her son would still drop everything for her. And Daniel, exhausted, juggling a business and a new marriage, kept answering. The apartment, the car, the bills, she never acknowledged them as gifts. She spoke as if they were her due, an inheritance she was collecting in installments. The real shift happened when I got pregnant. We told her at 10 weeks, excited and nervous, in the living room of that apartment her son paid for. She looked at the ultrasound printout, then at me and said, "You're very optimistic to share it this early. So many things can still go wrong." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Daniel stiffened beside me, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind his eyes, something that looked like the beginning of clarity. The pregnancy progressed, and Marguerite's interest remained clinical. She asked about the baby's sex only because she wanted a grandson to carry the Harper name. She offered no help preparing the nursery, no enthusiasm at the baby shower, which she attended late and left early. When our son was born, 7 pounds 4 ounces with a full head of dark hair and Daniel's exact chin, she did not visit the hospital. She sent a text that said, "Congratulations, rest while you can." I read it 3 times, trying to find warmth that wasn't there. Over the next year, she saw her grandson 6 times. Each visit lasted less than an hour. She held him once, for about 3 minutes, before handing him back with the observation that he seemed fussy. She had no photos of him in that apartment filled with framed pictures of Daniel at every age. The distance was so deliberate it felt like a message she wanted us to decode, but never to confront. But here is where the financial reality becomes impossible to ignore. By the time our son turned 1, Daniel was paying just under $4,000 a month to maintain his mother's lifestyle. Rent, utilities, car, insurance, the timeshare fees. That money came from the business his father had never lived to see grow. Every check was a thread connecting his mother's comfort to his own labor, and she had spent years convincing him that this arrangement was simply how families worked. The problem was, she didn't treat me or our son as part of that family. The first birthday party was my idea. I wanted to mark the milestone with something warm, a gathering of people who actually loved our child. We booked the private room of a restaurant near the water. 20 guests, balloons, a cake shaped like a sailboat, a high chair decorated with a banner that said 1. Marguerite called Daniel 2 days before to confirm the time, and then she added, "I hope Alina's family won't make things too loud. You know I get headaches." On the day of the party, she arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a navy dress and a necklace that cost more than the entire catering bill. She seated herself at the head of the table without asking, rearranged the place cards so she would be next to Daniel, and spent the first half hour talking to his cousins about a gallery opening she'd attended. Nothing about the baby, nothing about the day. I watched my son, in his tiny button-down shirt, smear frosting on his cheeks and laugh at his own reflection in a spoon, and I thought, maybe this is as bad as it gets. Maybe I was wrong. Then lunch was served, plates circulated, glasses were filled, and when the conversation lulled, Marguerite Harper set down her silverware, looked directly at our son across the table, and spoke the words that I have not been able to unhear. She said, with the calm of someone commenting on the weather, "I don't see any of our family in that child." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 12 people holding their breath, full of the weight of a sentence that had just reclassified a 1-year-old as a stranger. I saw my sister's jaw tighten. I saw Daniel's uncle look down at his plate. And I saw my husband, the man who had spent more than a decade paying for his mother's life, freeze with his fork still suspended in the air. What I didn't know yet was that everything, the apartment, the car, the decades of financial support, was about to be called in for a reckoning. Because when Daniel finally moved, it wasn't to smooth things over. It was to draw a line that his mother had never believed would be drawn at all. The silence lasted maybe 6 seconds. It felt longer. I saw Daniel's uncle place his napkin on the table with the slow, deliberate motion of someone preparing to leave a room where the air had turned toxic. My sister-in-law, the only person on Daniel's side of the family who had ever treated me like more than a guest, opened her mouth and closed it again. Then Daniel set down his fork. He did not shout. He did not slam the table. He turned in his chair to face his mother with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger, exactly, but something quieter and more final. It was the look of a man who had just been handed the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been assembling for decades. "What did you just say?" His voice was level. It was the tone he used in contract negotiations, the one that let the other party know the terms had shifted. Marguerite lifted her chin. "I said I don't see any family resemblance. It's an observation, Daniel. Don't make a scene." "You didn't say resemblance." He was still calm. "You said you don't see any of our family in that child. He's 1 year old, and you just told everyone at this table that he doesn't belong to us. To me." She waved a hand, the pearls clicking softly. "You're twisting my words. I simply meant." "I know exactly what you meant." He pushed his chair back and stood. "I've known what you meant for 3 years. The comments about her job, the wedding toast that wasn't about her, the hospital room you couldn't be bothered to visit. You've been telling me exactly what you think, and I've been pretending not to hear it because I didn't want to believe my own mother could be so determined to undermine my wife." He looked around the table. "I'm sorry," he said to the other guests. "This party is over. Please take food home if you'd like. We'll be in touch." People began to gather their things, murmuring awkwardly. My mother squeezed my arm as she passed. My sister gave Marguerite a look that could have stripped paint. Within 10 minutes, the room was empty except for the 3 of us, plus Daniel's uncle Frank, who lingered by the door as if he anticipated needing to intervene. "Daniel, this is absurd," Marguerite said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. She was not used to being the subject of rebuke. She was used to sighing and having the world rearrange itself around her. "Here's what's going to happen," Daniel said. "You're going to go home, And tomorrow, I'm going to come by your apartment, and we're going to have a conversation about what family actually means." She stood, collecting her purse with the careful dignity of someone who believed she was leaving on her own terms. "I hope by then you'll have come to your senses." She walked out without looking at me or the baby. Frank followed, giving Daniel a tight nod that seemed to say, "Finally." Then the door clicked shut, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the appetizers were served. We drove home in near silence, our son asleep in his car seat, frosting still crusted in the fine hair behind his ear. When we pulled into the driveway, Daniel turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. "She's been living on my money for 11 years, he said quietly. "Since the day my father died. I was 23, scared out of my mind, trying to keep a crew together and a business afloat, and her first question was whether I'd be able to maintain the lifestyle she was accustomed to. Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'How can I help?' Just the rent and the car and the vacation fund." I had heard pieces of this before, but never laid out so plainly. He continued, his voice gaining the rhythm of someone finally saying things he'd stored up for years. "The apartment was supposed to be temporary. She needed a place while she grieved, while she figured out what came next. But next never came. Every time I tried to talk about her getting a job, downsizing, learning to manage her own finances, she would start crying and mention my father's name, and I would fold. I folded for 11 years. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light of the dashboard, I could see how exhausted he was, not from the party, but from the accumulated weight of a relationship built entirely on extraction. I've been paying $4,000 a month to a woman who just told my wife in public that she doesn't see my son as my son. And I realized sitting there that she's never seen me as my own person either. I'm a provider. That's the role. That's the only role. He reached over and put his hand on mine. "I'm done. Tomorrow I'm telling her the payments stop. The apartment lease is in my name. I'll give her 60 days to figure out a new arrangement. After that, she's on her own." I felt a complicated rush of emotions. Relief, vindication, but also a small cold thread of fear. I knew Marguerite Harper well enough by then to understand that she would not go quietly. She had built her entire identity around being taken care of, and she would not surrender that identity without a war. The next day was a Sunday. Daniel called his mother and asked to meet. She said she was busy. He said it wasn't optional. They agreed on 2 o'clock. He asked Frank to join them as a witness. I stayed home with our son, packing the living room floor with a phone in my hand, waiting for updates. At 2:47, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. "Your husband just grew about 3 inches taller. Call me when you can." I called immediately. Frank stepped out of the apartment to tell me what had happened. Daniel had arrived, sat down, and presented his mother with a letter. It outlined, in clear, unemotional language, the timeline of financial support he had provided since his father's death. A total sum, calculated conservatively, of just under $530,000 across 11 years. It listed the rent, the utilities, the car payments, the insurance, the vacation costs, the incidentals she routinely charged to a credit card he paid off. Then it stated that effective at the end of a 60-day notice period, all such support would cease. She would be responsible for her own housing, her own transportation, her own bills. He would help her organize a transition plan if she cooperated. If she did not, the finality would remain, but without a plan. Marguerite, Frank said, had read the letter twice. Then she laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that died quickly when she looked at her son's face and saw no hesitation. "You can't do this," she said. "Your father would never allow it." "My father," Daniel replied, "never got the chance to see what you would become without him. He died thinking he was leaving you with a partner who would carry you through. He didn't know he was leaving me with a burden that would never be light enough. I've carried it. I've done my duty. Now I have my own family, and you just stood in front of 12 witnesses and told them my son isn't part of it. You don't get to say that and keep my money." She switched tactics. She cried. She reminded him of the sleepless nights she'd spent when he was a colicky infant, the piano lessons she'd driven him to, the sacrifices she'd made as a mother. Daniel listened, And then he said something that Frank told me he would never forget. "Those were your responsibilities as a parent. You don't get a lifetime invoice for them. And I've already paid it forward, Mom. I've paid for it with 11 years of my life and $500,000. We're square." He stood up and told her he would be in touch about the logistics of the transition. Then he walked out, Frank behind him. Marguerite did not follow. She stayed in that apartment her son had funded and began, immediately, to plan her counterattack. The counterattack unfurled over the following week with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment without consciously admitting it. First came the phone calls to relatives, aunts, cousins, anyone who would listen to a version of events in which an ungrateful daughter-in-law had poisoned Daniel against his own mother. Daniel's phone began buzzing with messages from people who had not spoken to him in years, urging him to reconsider, to remember his obligations, to not let a difficult woman, meaning me, tear the family apart. Then came the letters. Marguerite, it turned out, had a close friend who was a retired attorney, a woman named Patricia who specialized in elder law and who had apparently been advising her for some time. The first letter arrived by courier on a Thursday morning, printed on heavy stationery and signed by Patricia. It argued that Marguerite had a claim to ongoing support under a theory of implied contract, that Daniel's years of payments had created a legal obligation he could not simply terminate. It threatened litigation if support was withdrawn without a negotiated settlement. Daniel read the letter in his office and then called his own attorney, a man named Robert Chen who had handled Harper Commercial Contracting's legal work for years. Robert's assessment was blunt. The claim was unlikely to succeed in court. There was no written agreement, no contract, no promissory note. Daniel had been a voluntary provider, but a lawsuit, even a meritless one, would be expensive, public, and damaging to the business. Clients don't like hearing that their contractor is entangled in a messy family dispute. And if Marguerite was willing to go that far, she was also willing to drag things out. "I can't believe she'd do this," Daniel said to me that night, sitting on the edge of our bed with his head in his hands. "She's threatening to sue me, her own son, after everything." But I could believe it. The Marguerite I had known for 3 years was a woman who viewed relationships as transactions, and the threat of a lawsuit was simply a more formal version of the same dynamic she had been running for decades. Extract, pressure, guilt, and punish when compliance failed. The stakes escalated further the following week when Patricia sent a second letter, this one raising a new claim. She argued that Marguerite had contributed significantly to the early success of Harper Commercial Contracting in the years after her husband's death, hosting dinners for potential clients, making introductions, providing moral and emotional support that allowed Daniel to focus on growth. These contributions, she claimed, gave Marguerite a stake in the business itself, not merely in its revenue. The letter hinted at a potential claim for unjust enrichment, maybe even a constructive trust over a portion of the company's assets. Robert Chen reviewed the new letter and upgraded his assessment from nuisance to problematic. He told Daniel that while the claims were still weak, they were no longer frivolous. A court might take them seriously enough to allow discovery, and discovery alone would mean depositions, document production, financial disclosures, a deep and invasive look into the business that could scare off clients and investors. "It's a pressure tactic," Robert said. "She's trying to make the cost of cutting her off higher than the cost of keeping her on. She's betting you'll choose the cheaper fight." But by then, something had shifted in Daniel. The lawsuit threats, the family gossip, the coordinated campaign to paint me as the villain. Every new escalation only confirmed what he had already decided. His mother was not acting out of hurt or grief. She was acting out of entitlement so deep that she genuinely believed the law would protect it. And that realization, far from breaking him, hardened his resolve. "I'm not negotiating with my own ransom," he told Robert. "Fight it all the way." The next few weeks became a blur of lawyer calls and document gathering. Marguerite filed a formal petition in civil court seeking emergency temporary support, claiming she would face imminent homelessness and irreparable harm if payments ceased before the 60-day window closed. The petition cited her age, her lack of employment history, her reliance on Daniel's support as her sole source of income. It painted her as a vulnerable elderly woman being cast out by a cruel son under the influence of a manipulative spouse. When I read that filing, something in me broke open. I had been civil for 3 years. I had smiled through insults, swallowed dismissals, accepted a wedding toast that erased me entirely. But seeing myself named in a legal document as the architect of a scheme to destroy a helpless old woman, it was too much. I sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time since the birthday party. Not out of sadness, out of pure, white-hot fury. And then I noticed something in the documents that stopped me cold. It was a small detail, buried in the financial disclosure Marguerite had attached to her petition. A single line item I had to read 3 times to believe, because it revealed something about Marguerite Harper that Daniel and I had never known, something that would completely alter the trajectory of the legal fight and expose exactly how deeply her manipulation ran. The line item was a rental property, a 2-unit duplex in Greenville, South Carolina, listed under her name alone, with a current net rental income of $1,840 per month. According to the financial disclosure, she had signed under penalty of perjury. Marguerite Harper owned a piece of real estate worth approximately $260,000 that she had never mentioned to her son. Not once, in 11 years of claiming she had nothing. I stared at the page so long the words blurred. Then I called Daniel. He was silent for a long moment after I read him the line. Then he said, quietly, "Greenville, that's where my father's sister lived. He took care of her before she died. She had a little rental property. I thought it was sold to pay for her care." He paused. "My mother told me it was sold." That was the first moment we understood the true scope of what we were dealing with. This was not a woman who had simply grown comfortable being supported. This was a woman who had actively hidden assets while taking a monthly check from her son for more than a decade. She had watched Daniel work 80-hour weeks, miss vacations, put off his own dreams, all while she sat on a property that could have paid her rent 3 times over. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Robert Chen acted within 48 hours. He filed an emergency motion to dismiss Marguerite's petition for temporary support on the grounds of material misrepresentation and fraud upon the court. He attached the property records he had pulled from Greenville County: deed, tax assessment, rental registration, everything. The documentation showed she had owned the duplex since 2005, a full 7 years before her husband died. She had inherited it from her husband's sister, the woman whose care Daniel had helped pay for when he was barely out of college, and she had simply never told him it existed. When the motion landed, the retaliation was immediate. Marguerite's attorney, Patricia, withdrew from representation within the week. She issued a terse statement citing irreconcilable differences with her client, but Robert told us what that really meant. Patricia had realized her client lied to her too, and no lawyer wants to stand in front of a judge with a perjured financial disclosure. Marguerite was suddenly without legal counsel, her petition crumbling, and the narrative of the helpless elderly mother had been replaced, overnight, with something far uglier. But it gets worse. As Robert dug deeper, he found that Marguerite had not only hidden the duplex, she had been systematically funneling the rental income into a separate account she also failed to disclose. And she had been doing it for years, using the money to fund things she didn't want Daniel to know about: a country club membership, a personal shopper, a standing weekly appointment at a salon that charged $300 a session. All while asking Daniel to cover the grocery bill she claimed was stretching her thin. The discovery did not just upend the legal case. It upended the family. Relatives who had called Daniel to pressure him into reconciliation suddenly went quiet. His Aunt Margaret, his mother's older sister, called him and said through tears, "I didn't know about the property. I believed her. I'm sorry." Others were less apologetic. Some doubled down, insisting Daniel must have misunderstood, that there had to be an explanation, that Marguerite would never lie about something so serious. But the evidence was now public record, and the explanations never came. Marguerite herself did not go quietly. With her legal case in ruins and her reputation in shreds, she pivoted to the only strategy she had left: a full-scale emotional assault designed to bypass logic and appeal directly to guilt. She showed up at Daniel's office unannounced on a Tuesday morning, bypassing the front desk because the receptionist still recognized her as his mother. She walked into his office while he was on a conference call, sat down in the chair across from his desk, and refused to leave. He excused himself from the call. She began to cry, not the dramatic, performative crying of someone trying to manipulate, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who seemed, for the first time, genuinely broken. She told him she had kept the property because she was terrified of being poor, that she had grown up with nothing, that her husband had promised her she would never have to worry again, and that when he died, she panicked. She said the money Daniel gave her every month made her feel safe, and the duplex was a backup plan she was too ashamed to mention. It was the most honest she had ever been, and it almost worked. Daniel told me later that for about 30 seconds he felt the old pull, the urge to comfort her, to make it better, to be the good son who fixed things. But then he asked her one question. "Why did you say that about my son?" She didn't have an answer. She looked at her hands. She said she didn't mean it, that she was lashing out, that she felt displaced by the baby and by me. And that was when Daniel realized that even at her most vulnerable, she could not bring herself to apologize to his wife. She could explain, she could justify, she could cry, but she could not say the words, "I was wrong about Alina." He asked her to leave. She refused at first, then pleaded, then finally stood with the slow, heavy movements of someone who understood they had reached the end of a very long road. At the door, she turned and said, "You're really going to make me homeless, your own mother." Daniel looked at her and said, "You have a duplex in Greenville worth $260,000. You're not going to be homeless. You're just going to have to pay for your own life, like I've been doing since I was 23. She walked out. The receptionist later told me she had never seen someone leave an office building with such perfect posture and such hollow eyes. The next phase was not legal. It was relational. Marguerite began a campaign to turn the family business against Daniel. She contacted two of his biggest clients, a municipal development authority and a regional hospital group, and told them that Harper Commercial Contracting was in turmoil, that its owner was unstable, that personal family conflicts were jeopardizing his ability to deliver. One client expressed concern. The other called Daniel directly and asked, "Is there something we should know?" Daniel had to spend 3 days doing damage control, reassuring partners, providing documentation, demonstrating stability. The business survived, but the cost in time and trust was real. What Marguerite intended as a fatal blow turned out to be a glancing one, but only because Daniel had built a reputation strong enough to absorb it. And in the process, something hardened in him permanently. He told me one night, after the calls were done and our son was asleep, "She tried to destroy what I built. She tried to take food off our table to punish me for saying no. That's not a mother. That's a creditor who thinks I owe her a debt I already paid." The 60-day window we had given her was now down to its final 3 weeks. Marguerite, still without a lawyer, filed a last-ditch motion asking the court to extend the deadline, citing her age and claiming she needed more time to relocate. The judge denied it with a pointed note that referenced the undisclosed duplex and her lack of candor. The ruling felt like a sealed door. And then, just when we thought the worst was over, Marguerite made her final play. It arrived not as a legal filing or an office ambush, but as a letter sent to our home address, handwritten on thick cream paper, addressed to me. I opened it while Daniel was at work. She wrote that she had been wrong about me, that she had been jealous of the life I built with her son, threatened by a bond she could never replicate, and sorry for the years of coldness and dismissal. She said she wanted to know her grandson, to be part of his life, to make amends. She asked for a meeting, just the two of us, woman to woman, mother to mother. I read that letter 4 times, searching for the trapdoor. It read beautifully. It was the kind of letter you might keep in a box and show your grandchildren. And maybe, if it had arrived 6 months earlier, before the lawsuit and the lies and the attempt to destroy Daniel's business, I might have believed it was the beginning of a real reconciliation. But I had learned to read Marguerite Harper in the spaces between her words. And there was something about the timing, 3 weeks before eviction, with no legal options left, that made the urgency feel strategic rather than sincere. I called Daniel and read him the letter. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that sent ice through my chest. "She didn't send me a letter, just you. That's not an apology, that's a flanking maneuver." He was right. She was trying to split us, to reach me directly and appeal to my guilt or my hope, to create a wedge that would make me the one advocating for leniency. It was a final, elegant attempt to get back in, and it almost worked on me, because I wanted to believe her. I wanted my son to have a grandmother who loved him. I wanted the pain to stop. But I also knew that what my son actually needed was a mother who could see a threat for what it was, and refused to hand over the keys to someone who had already proven she would use them to hurt us. We did not respond to the letter. We did not grant the meeting, and the clock kept ticking toward the final day of those 60 days. Marguerite Harper, the woman who had ruled her son's life through guilt and money for more than a decade, was about to lose the apartment, the car, the credit cards, and the last thread of control she had over our family. But the way she lost it, and what happened the morning the moving truck finally arrived, was something neither of us expected at all. The moving truck arrived at 9:15 on a cold November morning, and Marguerite Harper was already gone. Daniel had arranged for a 3-man crew and a medium truck, expecting 11 years of accumulated belongings to fill it completely. His mother had lived in that 2-bedroom apartment for the entirety of her widowhood, and she was not a woman who traveled light. But when Frank unlocked the door with the spare key, Daniel had asked him to supervise, unable to face the scene himself. The apartment was nearly empty. The furniture was gone. The china cabinet, the antique sideboard, the heavy drapes that had blocked out the afternoon sun, all removed. The walls were bare except for faint rectangular outlines where framed photographs had hung for years. The only items left were stacked neatly in the center of the living room, 3 cardboard boxes labeled in careful handwriting. One said Daniel Childhood. Another said legal documents. The third said wedding photos, your father and I. Frank called Daniel from the empty apartment. "She moved out," he said. "I don't know when. The neighbors said they saw a different moving company here 3 days ago. She's been gone since Tuesday." Daniel absorbed this information with the same controlled silence I had come to recognize as his way of processing things he could not immediately reconcile. She had not begged at the final hour. She had not forced a confrontation at the doorstep. She had simply executed her own exit on her own timeline and left behind a few boxes that felt less like an olive branch and more like a closing statement. We went through the boxes that night. The childhood box contained report cards, school photos, a few drawings, and a handmade Father's Day card Daniel remembered making when he was 8. The legal documents were exactly what the label promised: old insurance policies, deed copies, a marriage certificate. And the wedding photos were a complete album of Marguerite and her husband on their wedding day, 38 years earlier. She had been beautiful in a way that surprised me, laughing in one photograph, her head tilted back, her hand on her new husband's chest. I tried to find that woman in the version of Marguerite I knew, and I couldn't. Something had replaced her somewhere along the way, and I would never fully understand what. But the real surprise was not what she left. It was what we learned a week later, when the building manager called Daniel to discuss the apartment's condition, and casually mentioned that Marguerite had been paying her own rent for the final 3 months. She had forwarded the rent directly to the management office, bypassing Daniel entirely, and told the manager she was transitioning her affairs. The money trail Robert traced later showed that she had sold the duplex in Greenville in early September, just 2 weeks after Daniel's confrontation at the apartment. She had walked out of that meeting with the letter of termination in her hands, and within days, she had contacted a real estate agent. By the time she was sobbing in Daniel's office a month later, the property was already under contract. She had been planning her exit the entire time. Every tear, every legal filing, every desperate phone call to relatives, it had all been theater. A final performance designed to extract one last concession, or failing that, to make her departure feel like a punishment rather than a retreat. She had known from the beginning that the game was over. She just wanted to play it until the last possible card was on the table. I thought about that letter she sent me, the one that almost reached something human in me. I had wondered in weak moments whether I had been too hard, whether I had denied my son a grandmother out of pride. The discovery that she had been liquidating assets while writing me love notes about reconciliation stripped that doubt away completely. It was not a peace offering. It was a Hail Mary pass, and when it didn't connect, she simply walked off the field. The aftermath of Marguerite Harper settled over our household slowly, like dust after a demolition. Daniel and I had conversations we had never been able to have while she was still occupying so much mental real estate. He told me things he had never said aloud, that he had resented her even as a teenager, that he had felt trapped by her grief after his father died, that a part of him had always known she was using him, but he didn't know how to stop it without becoming the villain. I told him that I had almost left him once, during our engagement, not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't see how I could survive a lifetime of her quiet hostility. He held me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see." I told him it took exactly as long as it needed to. The family business survived the turbulence intact. The Municipal Development Authority that had expressed concern renewed their contract after Daniel personally walked them through the company's stability and growth projections. The hospital group not only stayed, but expanded their scope. In the months that followed, Harper Commercial Contracting added 2 new major accounts, and Daniel hired a project manager to handle the workload he could no longer carry alone. The business, freed from the invisible tax of supporting a woman who did not need supporting, began to accelerate in ways that surprised even him. He told me one evening, looking at a profit and loss statement, that he hadn't realized how much of his energy had been spent carrying someone else until the weight was removed. The relationship with the extended family sorted itself into 3 camps. Frank, who had witnessed the birthday party and the fallout, became a regular presence at our home. He adored our son and never mentioned Marguerite's name unless Daniel brought it up first. Aunt Margaret, who had called Daniel in tears after the duplex revelation, slowly rebuilt a warm connection with us over Sunday dinners and holiday visits. She told me once, while we were washing dishes, that she had been jealous of her sister for years, jealous of the way Daniel supported her without question, jealous of the lifestyle she flaunted. "I knew it wasn't right," she said, "but I told myself it was none of my business. That was my failure. I'm trying to do better." I trusted that honesty more than any grand gesture. The second camp included the relatives who had urged Daniel to reconcile and never acknowledged the hidden property or the lawsuit or the attempt to sabotage the business. They sent polite holiday cards. They liked our family photos on social media. They did not ask difficult questions or offer real accountability. Daniel accepted this with a shrug. "They're choosing peace in their own way," he said. "I'm not going to chase apologies from people who aren't ready to give them." It was the most adult thing I had ever heard him say about family. The third camp was a single person, a cousin on Marguerite's side who had always been close to her, a woman named Sylvia who had never made an effort to know me or our son. She sent Daniel a long email about 6 months after the eviction, accusing him of elder abuse, of abandoning his mother in her time of need, of destroying the family over a petty slight at a birthday party. Daniel read it once, deleted it, and blocked her. He didn't mention it to me for 2 weeks because, he said later, he didn't want me to carry any more of his mother's poison. I appreciated the instinct, but I told him I would rather carry it together than have him carry it alone. That became our rule, in writing and in practice. No more solo burdens. We learned eventually, through the grapevine, where Marguerite had landed. She had moved into a small 2-bedroom house near Greenville, not far from where the duplex had stood. She had joined a local church group and, according to Aunt Margaret, had told people she moved south for the climate and a change of pace. She never mentioned a son or a grandson. When asked, she said her family was up north and left it at that. She had rewritten her story to exclude us, just as she had tried to exclude our child from hers. There was a symmetry to it that was almost elegant. Our son grew. His first word was Dada, then Mama, then Truck, which Daniel told me was a clear sign of professional destiny. He learned to walk in our living room on a rainy Saturday afternoon, and I sat on the floor and cried while Daniel recorded the moment on his phone. We celebrated his 2nd birthday in our own home, with a small group of friends and the relatives who had proven themselves trustworthy. No one made a speech about family resemblance. No one questioned his belonging. The cake was shaped like a construction site, with tiny toy excavators, and he smashed it with both hands while laughing the purest laugh I have ever heard. But here is what I need to tell you before this story closes, the detail that surprised even me. On the morning of our son's 2nd birthday, a small package arrived in the mail. The return address was Greenville. Inside was a single item, a sterling silver baby rattle, slightly tarnished, with a note in handwriting I now recognized. This was Daniel's. His father gave it to him the day he was born. I want your son to have it even if I can't. Marguerite. I sat with that rattle in my hand for a long time while the party preparations continued in the next room. It was not an apology. It was not an explanation. It was a single thread of connection, offered from a distance she would never close. I didn't know whether it was a genuine gesture or one final attempt to find an opening, and I realized I might never know. Marguerite Harper had proven herself capable of both real feeling and complete manipulation, sometimes in the same breath. The rattle could be a sincere gift from a grandmother who knew she had failed, or a calculated token designed to haunt me with the possibility that I had been too harsh. The uncertainty was the only honest part of it. I called Daniel in. He picked up the rattle, turned it over in his hand, and read the note. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I remember this. She used to keep it in her jewelry box. I thought it was lost." He set it down on the kitchen counter, and I could see him deciding what to do with it the way you decide what to do with a memory that sits uneasily between precious and painful. "We'll keep it," he said finally. "Not because she sent it, because it was his and now it's ours. She doesn't get to own the meaning anymore." That, I think, is the clearest summary of everything Daniel learned across those 11 years and 60 days. That love is not a debt, guilt is not a payment plan, and the only way to win a game of manipulation is to stop playing. Marguerite Harper lost her apartment, her car, her access to our family, and the false version of herself she had spent a lifetime constructing. But what she lost most completely was her power to define the terms of our relationship. Daniel took that power back, not in anger but in clarity. And once that transaction was complete, nothing she sent in the mail, no rattle, no letter, no late-blooming gesture, could ever undo it. The story of Marguerite Harper is not a tragedy. It is an accounting. A $500,000 son who paid every invoice his mother ever printed and then, finally, closed the books. When I look at our son now, I see Daniel's chin and Daniel's eyes and something else I cannot name, something that belongs entirely to himself. I see a child who will grow up knowing that love is not a lien against his future. And that, more than any rattle or inheritance, is what his father gave him the day he stood up, set down his fork, and said no more. Stories about mother-in-law conflict get shared millions of times a day in comment sections, group chats, and whispered phone calls between friends who feel like they're losing their minds. Most of them end the same way. Someone swallows the insult, the husband stays quiet, and the grandmother keeps her keys to the kingdom because no one wants to be the person who tore the family apart. This one ended differently because Daniel Harper understood something that a lot of people never let themselves fully believe. The family you build is not a subsidiary of the family you came from. It is its own sovereign entity, with its own borders, and anyone who refuses to respect those borders is choosing exclusion, not suffering it. Marguerite Harper is not homeless. She is not destitute. She is living in a house she bought with money she hid, in a town she chose, telling a story that excludes us as completely as she once tried to exclude our son. She got exactly what she always wanted, a world where she is the center of her own narrative. It just happens to be a much smaller world than the one she used to command. I still think about that rattle sometimes, not because I'm waiting for an apology that will never come, but because it taught me the final lesson of this entire experience. You can hold an object, a memory, a thread of connection, without letting it pull you backward. You can accept what little good remains while standing firmly on the other side of a door you had every right to close. That is not bitterness. That is balance, and it is available to anyone willing to stop mistaking endurance for love. If you are watching this and recognizing pieces of your own story, the in-law who treats your child like a stranger, the partner caught in the middle, the financial strings that feel impossible to cut, I want you to hear something clearly. You are not crazy. You are not the villain. And you are not required to fund your own disrespect. The question is not whether you can survive the conflict. It is whether the people who claim to love you are willing to act like it when the cost becomes real. This channel exists to tell stories that don't flinch from the hard parts. If that's what you needed today, pause for a second and subscribe. It tells the algorithm to keep bringing you back, and it tells us to keep making more. My name is Alina, and this was the story of how a 1-year-old's birthday party took down a kingdom built on guilt. Thank you for being here until the end.